Okay, this is the Women Painters West January 25 demonstration with Paul Paiement. And Annie, please take it away.
Okay, I didn't know Paul before, and it was funny because we found out that we are neighbors.
Yes.
Oh, you are? Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. But I have at that time seen his work in many exhibitions in the area, because it's and I remember, because sometimes you see work of other people and you don't remember the work.
Yeah.
When I visited him at his studio, I remember, oh yes, I know your work. Okay, and then so he is a wonderful painter. He's represented by different galleries, and in New York and in Los Angeles. And he's also a tenured professor in Cypress. I don't know how to pronounce it. College.
Cypress College. Yeah.
Yes. And he has written books, and his what he likes to paint, I think, but he will explain better than myself. He imagines landscapes, and also he puts architectural things with plexiglass and different materials. So, and it gives us a very sensation. It's not, when you see it, you know it's not a landscape, but it's so wonderful. Okay, so I think that better if you explain it yourself, Paul.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I just want to remind all of you that we're putting off the art share that was for this Saturday to the following Saturday. You all got notice of that, and that the deadline for this next show coming up is this Sunday. So just want to remind those of you that are here. Sorry.
Thanks.
Interrupt.
I just chatted with them.
Is that the 18th?
18th is the art share.
Okay, thank you.
Next Saturday, 1 to 4.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Sorry.
Thanks. Sorry, Paul.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
Well, thanks both to Jenny and Annie, and thanks for inviting me to be here. This is really wonderful. I love talking about my work, and I have a lot to say about it, and I have a lot of different approaches and angles. So a lot of times I like to find out who I'm speaking to, and what the group is and what they're about. And sometimes, for example, if I speak to students, usually I'll take a very different angle and talk about more of my thought process about how things develop. Sometimes I'm speaking to collectors, for example, and when I'm speaking to them, I'll take a different angle. But what I really enjoy is speaking to artists like this, other artists and especially painters, and talk about what my thoughts are. And generally, because I'm in academia, I generally take a little bit more of an academic approach to my work as well. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, you should be able to share. I made you as a co-host.
Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go. Okay, now is that full screen for everybody?
Yeah.
Sort of.
No.
Sort of full screen. Okay.
I
Great.
don't know how to get everybody invisible. So
No, that's the most you could.
maybe we should all mute while Paul's talking.
If you click on standard in the upper right-hand corner, you get
For me?
No.
Oh, for everybody else.
That's what it is.
Okay.
It's on standard.
And I think if anybody has questions, while I'm showing this, then please don't hesitate to ask. A lot of what I do is it's really idea-based work. So a lot of times these are, this Nexus series body of paintings really comes out of a number of ideas that I was thinking about for a long time, and I think my paintings are always, 5 to 10 years behind what I'm thinking about at those particular moments. So I'm always, I can never really catch up to where my mind is at. So I'm always behind. But so the idea of Nexus is the definition of it is the coming together. So for me, it's the coming together of both the natural and the architectural, and where these are, that they're not necessarily distinct, but how we can make this how we can make these things so that they have a symbiotic relationship rather than one that's an adversarial relationship. So this painting is I'll show some better examples of this, but this was from an exhibition I had at Tufinkian Fine Arts in 2024. Now I'll go into more detail about this too. Okay, great. So I use I always think in metaphors and visual metaphors specifically, and I'm sure like a lot of you, very, very visual thinker. So and I oftentimes my dream state is one where it's a very, very visual state. So I'm always thinking in terms of like not a translation necessarily of like what things mean literally from something visual into words, but that they just have a purpose in and of themselves. So one of the ways that I think of too is this kind of like dualistic aspect, which is right brain functions and left brain functions. This is like really popularized by her name slips my mind. Oh, Betty Edwards. She wrote a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this. It breaks up these things, these different characteristics into left brain and right brain characteristics. Like right brain characteristics, of course, are associated with creativity, imagination, intuition, insight, holistic thought, musical awareness, three-dimensional forms, and left-hand control. So, but also a lot of these characteristics we also we attribute to nature as well, or what's natural. Some left brain functions then would be like analytic thought, logic, language, reasoning, both science and math, writing, numerical skills, and right hand control. So I associate these all with the architectural, things that it's an architectural form of creativity. So this is a quote by Alan Watts, who's a British American philosopher that I'm very, very, very influenced by. So this quote I think is fantastic. It says, "You might say the distinction of the artificial from the natural is a very artificial distinction. The constructs of human beings are really not any more unnatural than beehives and birds' nests. They are extensions of ourselves." So I think this kind of hopefully is maybe not as a description of what I'm doing, but maybe more evocative of what I'm doing. And so this was the very first painting in the series that I did, and I was thinking of how I was going to incorporate these the painting element, but also adding a collage element, which is a three-dimensional element. That's where these architectural forms start coming into play, which I was drawing. So after I do the painting's an acrylic painting of a landscape, a remote setting. So I was also thinking a lot about aerial perspective and different forms of perspective. And so then I would do, I started, this is like how I started. And I didn't know exactly what I was doing at the time. I still don't know really what I'm doing. I have a lot of thoughts about what I'm doing, and those are kind of guiding my decision-making process. But so then I was taking drawing these architectural forms that were very the opposite. What I was thinking of in visual terms were very opposite of what was happening in the landscape, but trying to make these work together. And rather than painting them in, because if I paint them in, they would really become they'd become part of the picture. But instead, what I wanted to do was impose these on top of the painting itself, so that they had their distinct identity, but at the same time, they were kind of like fused into a setting. You know, I just thought of this, maybe a little bit the way that like an actor would be on a stage, where, you know, they're not part of the they're part of the stage, but they are separate elements at the same time. And actually, this is a really good. I just thought about this. This is a really good way of thinking of it, because really, what I'm thinking about doing was how to engage the viewer, how to engage my audience, the people that are looking at the painting. On what level am I engaging them? Is it something that they're going to look at, oh yeah, this, and categorize it as, you know, this is one of the, you know, 7,000 paintings I've seen in the past? Or how do I get them to engage in it on another level? And so I always think of like that fourth wall in theater. You know, we talk about that, for anybody with theater backgrounds. That fourth wall is, you know, where, at what point does the audience believe in what you're doing, and they start envisioning themselves and start becoming part of the scene. Another way of thinking of it might be about a movie that maybe you're watching, and, you know, maybe one of you are watching this movie and you're going, God, I just can't get into this. I don't believe this. I can't get into this movie because I can't believe this element of it, you know, whatever that is. Maybe it's the setting. You know, maybe it's some of the acting, maybe it's some of the lines that the actors are delivering, or it's like, I can't buy it. I can't get into this because of that. This happens to me all the time. And so what I'm looking to do is have the viewer kind of like be right on that edge where, yeah, at one point they're buying into and they're believing this setting that they're in. And another side of it is that there's an obstruction there, and that's where the architectural obstruction. So it's making us question what's going on all the time. So that's really what I want from the viewer, to be able to sit back and enjoy it, but at the same time, maybe start having to question these elements. So these are some of the influences that I'll talk about now, where I was coming from. I was very influenced by these Romantic era painters such as John Constable and William Turner, Caspar David Friedrich. These are all Romantic era painters. And the Hudson River School painters like Church, Thomas Cole, Bierstadt. So, you know, this landscape was never really a subject matter before this era. There might be some art historians that might take me on there. But in terms of subject matter, it really took off with during this period where prior to that, the landscape was included oftentimes in paintings, but it wasn't necessarily the subject of it. And so there's a transcendental element that they brought in, these painters brought in to the landscape, that there was almost a Zen embodiment of a deity or an order that was going on in the universe that was brought in by these painters. So, and of course, one of the Romantic era poets was William Blake. And this is a very famous quote from him. It's from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, his epic poem. And it's if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as to man as it is infinite. So these are all elements that I find that I also want to include, but I think of my paintings as often as updates. Update might not be the right term, but maybe as a similar expression, but in a different era. This was one of the very, very first ones that I did from this time, and this is I'm trying to remember. I think it's close to about 40 inches wide, 40 inches wide, and 28 inches high. So, you know, it's a pretty good size painting. And some of the things that I was really struggling with at this time was I really hadn't painted a landscape. So I was kind of working with the painterly knowledge that I had, and working with and questioning a lot of things. I think scale is a really important part of what I'm doing, how big my paintings are. And I think in an ideal world, these would be very, very large. You know, we're talking maybe 8 feet wide, and maybe, 5 feet high, something. And the reason is because that the scale is so important, because I really want the viewer to be able to look at these and really to be able to see themselves in this location, in this spot, so that they relate to it on a one-on-one basis. I think of this a lot like, maybe if you're watching a movie on your iPhone, which I find really awkward, but I do sometimes, as opposed to going into a movie theater and seeing, this grand scale of a movie, and how easy it is to kind of identify with what's going on when everything is larger than you. Like, you become part of the scene. When you're watching something that's, like on your phone, if I were to watch all of you on my phone, you're looking at this like little thumbnails, it's like with everything around you and all the sounds and everything around you. But when you're in a movie theater watching a movie, it's easier to really get into this whole scene because you're identifying it on a different level. And the sound, the sound is like overwhelming when you're watching movies. So I'm thinking about those things a lot, and how much detail to put, and these are all questions that were coming to mind at that time. And then this is also, this painting is from 2019. So now that's about 6 years old. It's 24, this one's 24 by 30 inches. So the other thing that now, as you're kind of seeing a couple of these now, I'm really thinking a lot about the transparency of this, how much I'm gonna obliterate of the landscape, or how much it's gonna be overtaken, rather than being completely disguising what's behind it, or obscuring what's behind it, trying to find a balance of how much is being obscured and how much is being revealed in some of these scenes. So I'll tell you a little bit about the process. Again, I think one of the things that for me that I really love about what I do is that I can really go out and kind of question what I want to do and figure it out, and really be okay with not having answers to what I'm doing. And the process of making the artwork is helping me to come up with answers, because I'm starting to ask myself what things I start feeling, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. Am I just falling back on kind of old patterns and comfort level, or am I going out there a little beyond what I'm comfortable with, beyond what I really like doing, and able to ask questions about those things. So my wife always comes with me when I'm going to these locations, this is on the from left to right. The left side is in southern Arizona. The one right next to it, this is in the rainforests of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. Gee, I'm trying to remember where this one is. I can't remember exactly. And this bottom one here, this is in New Mexico. No, this is in southern Utah. So initially I started going out and photographing in these locations, and I'd spend a lot of time just taking pictures. And one of the things that I was looking for in the photos was that I'm looking for a lot of depth in them. So I'm looking for like an infinite space that goes back. That was something that early on was really important to me, so that the architecture then would be interrupting this infinite view that we might have. Oh, this is, and then I'd bring them back and I'd start painting from the photographs. So here's an example of this. This is in my studio in Long Beach. So you can see that, you know, I'm spending a lot of time on these. You can see the scale. I really have a hard time making videos of myself painting. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but it's a real challenge. Anyway, so some other things that I started doing, I felt like in addition to interrupting the surface of the painting, because as I was mentioning before, you know, the surface of the painting then becomes like a window that we're looking through. And by having the architectural forms kind of sitting on top of that, my feeling was that this is obscures the landscape behind it, makes us very aware of it, and maybe aware of you know, how we can have how we can make a landscape that is integrated into the topography rather than one that's really being separated from it. But as I was doing that, I was thinking about, like, you know, what happens when we attach these things to the surface of the painting. But then on the other side is what happens when we go into the surface of the painting. So we're going into the window. So my idea was to actually etch into the surface of the painting with these drawings. And I still really love this idea of, after the painting is done, having a drawing that is going to be etched in. Now, this could be accomplished with canvas if I were painting on canvas, but because I'm painting on wood, I'm able to draw into the surface. So I've got these, you can see this is these are architectural lines that are drawn out in perspective into the space, and then they're etched into the surface. This was the very first one that I did like this. And I'll show you some more too. And I've got some videos if you'd like to see them of that being etched into the surface. So here's an example of that first painting I was showing you, and you can see the side. You can see the side of the painting. So they're you know, they've got and they're architectural, I think, in the sense that they have a presence to them, and they're meant to have kind of a three-dimensional presence to them as well. With this one, I think I've got I don't have a detail of this for some reason. Let me see if I can zoom in on it. I can't. But this is an architectural form that I'm pointing out here, and you can see that the shadows on the top. So you can see that it's like gouged into the surface of the painting. And then over on the other side, this part, this is plexiglass that has been attached to the surface of the painting. So the reason that I chose plexiglass the main reason that I chose plexiglass is because it is a synthetic material that is anything but natural. And so my idea was to try to take these like things that are very polar opposite and to try to make them work together. So initially I started painting these as well. Or I take that back. I was using plexiglass that that was already pre-made and pre-tinted in these different colors. One of the problems I had with it was that there are a very limited amount of colors that you can buy. And the other thing is that the surface of the plexiglass is extremely shiny. So if you're standing in front of one of these, the plexiglass that's pre-made or pre-bought, it would have an extremely mirror-like surface to it. So you can easily see yourself as part of that, which in some cases might be a desirable characteristic, but I found it a big problem as well. So what I did was I figured out how to paint onto plexiglass and how to just tint the plexiglass out. Let me go back so I can show you a better example of what I'm talking about. So I can actually tint the plexiglass. So this is airbrushed. I'd never airbrushed before, but I figured out how I can airbrush and have it stick to the plexiglass. So sticking to this surface. And so all of these then are cut out. They're almost like puzzle pieces that are cut out and then laid into each other, into this. So all of this was a big learning process to me, but that's what I really love doing, is to figure these things out and how to present them the way that I really want to present them. These are all inspired by some of these relief painting or these relief pieces. This is Gilberti's The Gates of Paradise in Florence. And you can see that what I find really fascinating about this is that it's very difficult to determine where the surface is, because some of these areas are cast or drawn into, and these other pieces that are on the front are very, very much three-dimensional. You know, like you can put your finger behind this figure's head, and you know, if you were to actually reach into this, you can go into the surface, but where is the surface of this illusion? So I find this really engaging. And I remember as a kid seeing these in relief qualities of artwork. And I'd spend a lot of time really like looking at these, and I was fascinated by this illusion. So here's the Gates of Paradise in its entirety, and you can see that you know, if you were to stand next to it, you might, I would say maybe about 13 feet high, but you can see that each one of these tableaus has that quality to it. So I find it like a very fascinating quality, this thing where, you know, the illusion is one that's actually, it's sculptural in one sense, but then it's also pictorial in another. So this is another example of that. This painting over here, this, I'm going to show you an example of this. This is the tree on the left side, on the far left, is like very, very thick paint, super thick paint. And then over on the right, over in this area, you can see that that's been sculpted out of the surface of the painting. And then there's the plexiglass piece that's on top of that. And again, you know, we've all been I would say we're all very familiar with Van Gogh's Starry Night. This is like, I think, one of the most famous examples of this really, really tactile paint that's been used. And, you know, so it's not only the tactileness of the paint, but then there's also a direction that all of this has as well. that I think is really fascinating and really engaging. Yeah, so this is an example of the paint I was talking about before, where it's sculpted. So I had never really done this before. Especially using paint like this was very intimidating for me, and it took me, I don't know how long, but like maybe a couple of years to like really give myself enough courage to go up and start using this and start figuring out how I was going to use it exactly.
Paul, you have a couple of questions in chat. Would you like to answer them now?
Sure. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. I said
one from Diane, one from Nancy, right at the bottom.
Okay, Diane. Okay. Do you paint into the original photographs mounted on wood? No, the everything's a painting, so it's all painted, and there's no photographs. Photographs are only the reference for the painting. And how do you adhere the plexiglass to the painting while keeping it? Yeah, okay. So that's a great question. That's a great question. And that has taken me a long time to really figure out how to do this. But this is a great example. So here we have the painting in the background, and here is the etched part of the painting. So again, in a CAD program, a CAD program is an architectural program for drawing architecture, and so that's where I did this particular form is drawn, and then it's etched into the surface. It's etched into the surface of the painting, so that you can. I can't zoom in on this, unfortunately. I'm going to show you a video so you can see exactly how this works, and at one point, just so that you get a better idea of it. And then over here, so these are the architectural forms that are, I'm also drawing in the CAD program. And then I have a laser cutter, cut it out, and then I airbrush it. But then these two architectural forms are painted actually onto the surface of the painting in this case. So to answer your question, this is, I think let's see, let me go back. It is, about how are these adhered to the surface of the painting. So I've got to tell you, I spent a lot of time, I mean, I think at least a year and a half or 2 years figuring out how to do this. So since I'm speaking to artists here, I'll go through my thought process here. My feeling is that I had to make, however I get these to fit onto the painting, I had to make them part of the painting, or I have to make them invisible. I've got to go in either direction, one or the other. And so my choice was to make them invisible so that they're not an issue necessarily. So what I came up with was, because these are painted on wood, they're very small screws that are going through the back of the painting. And you can't see them here, which is exactly what I want. Again, because if you don't see them, then they're not an issue for the most part. But the paintings are coming through the back, or the screws are coming through the back of the painting, and there are very, very small holes that are going through the plexiglass. And so if this is the side of the plexiglass, the screw is going through the back of the painting and then through the plexiglass. I don't have enough hands to demonstrate this, but they're going through. And the reason that it's working is because the hole that I put into the plexiglass is a little bit smaller than the screw. So when the screw hits it, it's a little bit smaller and it self-threads as it's going through. And so that's how that's working. But again, this really took me a long time to figure out how to make this work. And I spent a lot of time like just getting this right, so that it would work. And once I figured it out, it's pretty easy to do, but it took a lot of trial and error in it. But again, that's like one of the things that I really enjoy is like that kind of problem solving. So how do you adhere the plexiglass to the painting while keeping it translucent? Yeah. So that's exactly how. What is the medium you use to build? Oh, the sculpture tree. So let me go back to that. Let me go back to the sculpted tree. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. So this is so the sculpted tree is in acrylic paint. So yeah, that is all acrylic paint. One of the brand of paint that I use is called Golden, and if some of you paint in acrylic, you're probably familiar with it. They make a really great acrylic paint, and one of the things that they do is they make every color in 5 different viscosities. So 4 or 5. So you can get it in like ultra heavy body. Then they also have another version of that exact same color in light body, and then they have it in airbrush medium as well. So with all of these, you can either, and the amazing thing about it is that you can buy every color in all of these different versions, and the very thick versions haven't lost any of their pigment quality, and the thin versions haven't either. So even a thin version of it, like one that it's so thin that you could put through an airbrush, it's so thin, but it still has its pigment strength to it as well, if that makes sense to you. So it would make sense that like if you add water to it to thin it down, that it's just gonna become super transparent and lose all of its pigment, but it doesn't. So that's one of the amazing things I think about this paint. Just a minute, I'm gonna turn on light in here because this is great. Okay, it's a little bit better. So I hope I answered that question for you, and that's like a real techie question. But since we're talking to painters here, I think this is perfectly appropriate. But that's just to go back to one of the reasons that I chose acrylic paint was for that reason too. When I was a student, I painted in oil paint, and that's where I really learned how to paint, was using oil. But I find acrylic paint, the possibilities with acrylic paint and what you can do with it are a lot more open, I would say. I think one of the reasons that we're getting these really amazing murals, for example, and as most of you are from and are in and around Los Angeles, we get these amazing murals, and a lot of it has to do with the paint is changing, right? I mean, when I was at Art Miami, I spent a lot of time with a muralist named, well, there are a couple of them. One of them is Cobra, who is a Brazilian artist whose work I was very familiar with. I'd seen it all over. I'd seen it in New York. I'd seen it in Minneapolis. I'd seen it in Europe. And these really, really fantastic murals. The one that I saw in Minneapolis, they caught my eye immediately. It was a Bob Dylan. But there are a bunch of other things that are happening in it. And I saw it and I was blown away by it. And then I saw, at least 2 other murals by him in Manhattan here. And I was completely blown away. I was like, wow, these are unlike any other murals I've ever seen in my life. And I have to attribute the ability to do these murals to the paint quality that's coming out now. It could never have been done in oil paint before. And now that we've got these really high grade acrylic paints, like we're able to do this. So I think this is a really amazing area to go into. And again, if you got, I'm looking for any other questions that you guys might have as I go along here. Okay. So this, so the other thing that I stumbled upon while I was doing this is in my painting classes, one of the things that I teach my entry-level students is the idea of painting in layers and underpainting, and like creating an underpainting and then glazing on top of that. And one day while I was doing it, I was trying to illustrate this idea, like what a difficult concept this is to get for a lot of times for people to understand that, like, well, why would you paint a foundation layer of paint and then paint on top of that? Isn't that painting twice? My students ask me that all the time. And I'm like, yes, but not necessarily. And so I talk a lot about Leonardo da Vinci and during the Renaissance, that a lot of the Renaissance painters are actually doing underpaintings that create a foundation for their painting, and then they're painting on top of that. And as I was illustrating this point, I started blocking off areas, and I went, oh, I see some possibilities here for another way to express this idea, these architectural forms, rather than, again, not only in plexiglass, but how could I also do that and masking off the underpainting and have the architectural form, and then painting this in color as well. So I had this revelation of like, oh, this is another way that I can express this idea. So that's where this came in. The tree over here is that I painted is like, again, it's like that other tree. It's like very, very thick paint. And so this has a much more tactile surface to it, while the other parts of it have a very kind of like smooth, flat surface to it. So again, it's a way for me to engage a number of other senses in the viewer, rather than just the visual sense that we have, right? Because again, here we are, we're talking on Zoom, and we've got this, everything is like very flat, very digital, illuminated from behind. But now, you know, I'm thinking about how to make paintings that are very distinct from other types of images that we might come in contact with on a daily basis. You know, especially these digital images, which are so seductive in, you know, they look amazing. You know, I'm looking at my laptop monitor right now, and it's like, wow, yeah, this is they have such amazing quality. Our flat screen TVs now are so great. I was just visiting, I did a studio visit with a video artist today. And I've known her for, I don't know, maybe 30 years. And when she first started doing them, you know, video artists had to work on little tiny kind of, you know, color TVs, you know, that was their ability, or very bad projectors, low quality. And now they're just like, they're absolutely amazing. So as an artist, as a visual artist, as a painter, I'm always thinking of like, well, how can what I'm doing, how can what I do compete on that level with this technology, this extremely seductive technology that we have. So I'm always thinking of different ways of engaging the senses of the viewer. So again, that's where this comes in. These are a little bit newer. I think these paintings are, I'm going to say these are 2022. So we're like just on the other side of the pandemic at this point. And here, this is an example of, rather than, again, going into the surface of the painting. So I'm using the architectural elements, but using them as like wood inlays in this scene. And the black and white paint that I was using before, that monochromatic paint, now I'm using like very, very thick, and really thinking about the direction of the paint a lot. The direction of the paint is really the key to, I think, to painting thick. And again, I'm sure a number of you are far more skilled at it than I am. I'm stumbling my way through all this stuff, and just using my painterly knowledge and my experience that I've had in the past in doing this, figuring out. I was definitely never trained this way. I was trained as a painter. It was very much a laissez-faire way of teaching painting, which was like, I'll do a little demonstration of my first class, my first painting class. So we all walk in, teacher goes, okay, here are the materials that you should get, handed out a Xerox copy with all the paint that we should buy, the brushes we should get, and hand that out. And then they say basically, okay, so buy all these materials and you guys can work here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. This is class time. Come on in and work during class. And then let's talk. We'll have a critique in about a month and let's see what you guys are up to. So there's like basically no skill taught. So all the skills were things that we had to kind of develop on our own. Which I think in some ways, you know, I understand that way of teaching. I take a different approach now as a professor myself. I take a different approach to teaching painting, which is definitely early on developing skills. Anyway, so here you can see this is the detail. So we've got, again, these different experiences that are going on here. You know, one where we've got some very, very flat paint, some very, very viscous, thick paint. And then to go along with that, these architectural spots or elements that are actually coming off of the surface of the painting. How would you describe the relationship of the architectural shapes to the landscape? Is there a metaphorical meaning? Yeah, I would definitely say there's metaphor involved in that. And again, I'm if I go back and you know, we look at what I was talking about earlier with these two things coming together. So thinking maybe about all of consciousness coming together, there's the more what we might refer to as the right side, again dealing with a holistic way of thinking, making kind of like decisions, meaning kind of more holistic in the way of thinking, and maybe the left side being much more about logic, about these two things coming together. So that's I would say that's what the metaphor is in that, is that these don't have to be adversarial relationships of but how can we make a think of us as being one with nature, rather than one that there's nature and then us, and that mankind has to conquer nature. that we have one that's a symbiotic relationship rather than adversarial, I think would be the metaphor. That would be the meaning for me in this. I hope that answered your question, Patricia.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I know, and a lot of times, you know, I don't know, like when I say this, a lot of times people are very opposed to it. This idea that I have about this, but it's not my idea either. This is a universal idea. This isn't, I don't own this by any means. But it's a different way of thinking. It's thinking that like we're actually a part of nature rather than being separate from it. A lot of times, you know, we want to shame ourselves and say that, you know, these things are horrible that we're doing to the environment, which, yeah, they're completely irresponsible, and they're a bunch of horrible things. But there's also, I think, ways that we can live within our surroundings that are much more responsible when we're building into yeah. I don't want to get too caught up in that, but basically that's it. Again, so my paintings now are getting bigger too. So I'm as I mentioned, I really desired to paint large. But one of the issues that I had when I first started doing these is that they were so they were so time consuming for me to make these really large. They took way longer than I thought they were going to take. The first one that I did that was very large, I don't think I've got an example of it here, but it's 6 by 8 feet, and it took me 14 months to paint. And I paint every day, and it was like, oh wow, this is a huge undertaking. And so to be able to get my ideas out faster, I had to scale them down and make them smaller. And so again, I'm learning a lot as I'm doing this. All this, what you're basically seeing is my thought process in all of these. This is actually one of my favorite paintings that I've done. This is again, this is pretty big. This is approximately 7 feet wide and about 4.5 or 5 feet tall. Yeah, it's approximately that size. I can't remember what the exact dimensions are at hand. But again, this is again, like where the routers routed the architectural form into the surface of the painting. So 2022, I did a residency in Oregon, on the Oregon coast, in a place called Neskowin. And I had about 2 weeks, and one of my goals while I was there was that I was going to teach myself how to do plein air painting. So painting on site outside. And I was really thinking of, again, going back to this kind of right brain, left brain duality in here. I was thinking a lot about Monet at that particular time. So this is I love this painting. It's somebody painting, I can't remember who did this. But it's a painting of Monet painting. Plein air.
Degas.
You know, I think you might be right about that. It might be Degas.
Or maybe Monet. But it looks like Monet. It looks
like Monet, doesn't it?
Painting too. That's what's funny about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But one of the
could be Renoir. Could be Renoir.
Might be. It might be. And you know, for some reason, I didn't write down who did it. But I should know. It's in my presentation. But I'll get back to you guys about that. So anyway, but the process of right brain or of plein air painting then is, as I see it, it's very right brain. It's about improvising. It's about intuition. You're painting wet on wet, or you're responding to your environment. You know, the uncontrollable, unpredictable environment. So it's spontaneous. You know, you're reacting to what you're seeing without any kind of preconceived ideas. Where the other type of painting that I've been done prior to this is very left-brained. I think in a lot of ways, it's very strategic. It involves a methodology. It develops over time. So what I was doing was I wanted to, again, put these two types of thinking or types of, you know, that's metaphor that we were just talking about. Patricia brought that up, and to bring this into the fold. So it was a new challenge for me. So I think this is a video. So this is the studio I was working in at this residency, which actually I never actually used the studio. I think I used it one time. It was more of a storage place. Thank you. That's by Manet. Exactly. Thank you, Annie. So this was the very first one I did. You can see it was just, the setting was absolutely amazing. So one of the challenges that I had in doing this was to find these locations that I was going to paint. And I had this kind of crazy thought. I had this crazy thought that before I went, I thought, okay, well, how long are these going to take me? Well, Monet did a painting in the morning and a painting in the afternoon. I thought, yeah, I could probably do that. And I was so completely wrong. I wasn't even close. The paintings were taking me like the entire day to do it. And I knew that there were certain things that were going to happen. I knew that light was going to change, that the conditions were going to change. I just didn't know exactly how much they were going to change. So these were all things that I was kind of in for while I was doing this. And I was also trying to paint at a scale that was manageable in it. So, oh, just a minute. Let me go back. Sorry about this. So one of the things that's fun, I could bring my dog with. And of course my wife, who is a great videographer. She photographs and video records me while I'm painting. But I tend to be I have a tendency to be much slower and much more deliberate. And one of the nice things about plein air painting is you have to kind of throw a lot of that stuff out into the wind. And so I had to like really change my attitude and change the way that I think about painting and doing this, which was really, really nice. And you know, also not using a brush, but using just palette knives to do this. And also being prepared for all these extreme conditions. Jenny's question, yeah, am I using, yeah, I was just using clear gesso on them. Exactly. Yes, and Zoni asked, do you generally start with the background before focusing on the main object? Yeah, absolutely. I always work from the back to the forward. That's the methodology that I have, I would say, is working from the background to the foreground.
Got it.
So here are some of the finished paintings from there. And so I was integrating these architectural elements into those scenes. So this is what you're seeing behind is the plein air version. And then on top of that, these are paintings on top of the architectural forms that I later did back in the studio. So you can see that these are obviously like much more detailed, but from exactly the same point of view. So again, here's a little detail of that. You can see that this is the later painting that then is attached to the surface of the plein air version.
Wow.
So these the other thing that I didn't anticipate before doing this either is that after I get done, so after I'd start at like about 8:30 in the morning and paint without stopping until about 4:30, 5 o'clock, sometimes a little bit later. Sun was up a little bit longer. So then I'd have to go out and start looking for new places to paint for the next day, which that was a real challenge in and of itself. Oh, and so the wood panels that I'm finding here or that I'm painting on are ones that I'm finding oftentimes not in these exact locations, but they're kind of discarded in different locations. And I loved bringing that kind of like historical element into the painting as well. So here's another little plein air version. Yep, little. So what percentage of the painting is finished in the studio? Just a minute. The part of the painting that's finished in the studio then is the part that is inside of the architectural part. So that's the part. Everything else then was done on location and finished on location. So again, for me, this is like really challenging painting like this because it's a lot more raw. Yeah, here's a detail of
Wow.
that.
Gorgeous.
Thank you. Thanks. So those are some of the ideas that I'm working with. I think that is. Oh wait, you know what? I still have just a couple more that I want to show you too. And then thanks for being patient with all of this. Oh yeah. Oh, this is actually a video. Yeah, so Jenny's question is, are the wood overlays attached in the same way as the plexiglass ones? Yeah, they're attached exactly the same way. Oops, sorry. Okay, so that is, okay. Okay, I think, sounds like I'm going a little over my time. So does anybody have any other questions or anything that I can answer?
I have a question.
I can try. Nancy?
Yes, I was wondering if you had an architectural background, because I feel like you really do integrate beautifully architectural forms within a setting, and you
It
use
does look, huh?
So I thought, well, maybe you have had an architectural background, and I thought you could also, as well as being a stupendous painter, you could be an architect as well.
Thanks for saying that. But I have zero background in architecture.
Oh, okay.
I've no background in architecture. I'm just a lover of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the, and I find it really interesting, just the way that we use spaces, you know, public spaces, private spaces, all that is fascinating to me. And then, you know, how this all gets integrated into a bigger cosmos is like, again, you know, even like city planning and urban planning is like a really interesting and fascinating thing that I think a lot of times we don't always we take for granted. You know, how cities grow, for example. You know, first thing that comes to mind is you know, cities on the East Coast. Boston is a great example where you know, I've read Walden's Pond, you know, and this was supposed to be this pond that was like way out in the wilderness at this time in the mid 1800s. And you go out there now, and it's not even a suburb; it's practically integrated into Boston. You know, it's
Right.
like kind of mind blowing to me
Yeah.
about that. And then, you know, when you go to cities west of the Mississippi, they're completely planned out on a grid. You know, so it's like, you know, the build it and they will come attitude is much more there than kind of this organic thing where just something kind of naturally is growing out, you know, and taking its own form. So again, I'm kind of interested in these ideas and in architecture and our natural world, how this is all in kind of infringing on this, and you know, what does all this mean is all kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, I thought when you were talking about birds' nests and that, and being actually, we think of our creations being artificial, and they're not. When you think of,
No,
and I think it's like you do integrate your architectural forms, whether transparent or otherwise, very beautifully into the environment. And I just
agree.
impressed with that very
oh,
much.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
I have a comment.
Oh, sure.
I love the way you use the palette knife and really feel the three-dimensional texture of the painting.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, especially because speaking of artificial, you know, it's very foreign to me. Painting with a palette knife is I really had to spend a lot of time kind of letting go, you know, as somebody who is a bit of a controlling person. Well, controlling in the sense that I feel like maybe controlling, maybe part of it is controlling, but maybe the other part is that I like to use the term deliberate instead to describe it. And when you have something as clumsy as a palette knife, it's hard to be very, you know, you can't really start digging into small areas and kind of bringing things out. Everything's just kind of very, you know, you have to let it go and go with what you got there, you know?
It's like sculpting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it is really fun.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I'll get my palette knives out.
Huh, great. Anybody else?
I was just, while I was, excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay, I was just, as I was watching these, I felt like I wanted to try to say something more about the architectural entities in the paintings. They're very modern looking, but they also, as Nancy said, fit into the landscape so beautifully. And then immediately Frank Lloyd Wright came to my mind.
Yeah.
And Falling Water, for instance. And I just thought, actually, none of these structures are intrusive in the landscape. So
yeah,
that fits with, when I started thinking about this all, it fits with your idea of your metaphor of the harmony of structures.
I agree.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright, it's huge as a thinker. I'm very, very much influenced by him. But also, I don't know how many of you have been to Sedona.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I think of that as like almost the perfect you know, almost the perfect model or the best model that we have of like where my thoughts are about it, where, you know, you're in the middle of the city that's a fairly good sized city, but it does not feel like you're in a city at all. It's because all the buildings are so perfectly fused into the landscape. It's really, really fascinating. And it's kind of hard when you're there to wrap your head around it. Like, wait, there are people out there, you know, there's buildings, what, you know, because they're just like, you can't see them, and they're even close to you, you know, when you're like on the main strip there. It's kind of it's a really fascinating place.
Mm.
And maybe that might become a model for cities of the future to be much more like that too.
Yeah.
I also had a question. Well, something that impressed me is that you didn't talk about this, but something that I felt in looking at your work is that, especially when you have that those transparencies with architectural forms, that to me, it also gave me a sense of what could have been in the like overlaying points in time that differ, like what may be in the future, what may have been in the past. And that kind of was just another little tangent I went off on in my own thinking, but it was kind of
sure.
I can see that as well. I can see that part, that aspect of it too.
Yeah, I think for me that's you know, I think as artists, you know, maybe sometimes we think about this and sometimes we might not consider it that much, but how our work is really, it's nothing but poetry, and poetry in the sense that we have some control over. I have control over what I'm saying.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily have control over the way that that's being received. Right, and so what?
So
and
here.
So sometimes people can interpret these things in, you know, in anything that I'm putting out there, people can interpret them in a multiplicity of ways. So, you know, we have like maybe a general cultural way of interpreting it, but then there's also, everybody has an individual read on that as well. You know, today I was walking around in Manhattan and I smelled something I hadn't smelled since I was a kid, and it was like Lebanese kebabs. And immediately my mind went back to being a little kid in downtown Minneapolis. And when I think of that, I think I'm in an urban, like I'm in a downtown area or in a very urban area when I smell that. And I hadn't smelled it in so long. It was like, oh, wow, that is crazy. But that's my interpretation, which is going to be completely different from somebody else's interpretation of it. So we all bring our own history, our own past, our own associations to this. And so I think when really, for me, really great artwork does that. You know, it has something that has cultural significance and maybe significance to these moments that we're in right now, but also into things from the past, and also possibly alluding to things in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so, any other questions or comments? Okay, then thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to end the recording at this point.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Great.
Very nice.